I woke up to a dim light flickering above me, the faint beeping of machines around me echoing like a heartbeat in the dead of night. My head throbbed, the pain dull but persistent. Blinking the haze out of my eyes, I surveyed my surroundings. The hospital room was sterile and cold, a single window across from me blocked by heavy, dark curtains. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. I had no memory of arriving here, no recollection of the accident that had led me to this place. All I knew was that my body was bandaged, my right leg encased in a plaster cast, and every inch of me felt sore, weighed down by an invisible pressure. The room was too quiet. I pressed the call button, but no one came. The hum of the fluorescent light was the only response I got. Shifting uncomfortably in the bed, I stared at the shadows playing across the ceiling, waiting for anyone to acknowledge my presence. After what felt like hours, I gave up, resigned to the solitude. The quiet, though, wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. I felt watched, though I was alone. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next time I opened my eyes, it was still dark. But this time something had changed. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall outside my door. Slow, deliberate. My body tensed, anticipation building as the steps drew closer. But they stopped. Right outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the handle to turn, for someone to walk in, for anything, but the door remained closed. The footsteps didn't move. They just lingered. "Hello." I called out, my voice dry and cracked. No response. The hair on the back of my neck prickled as I tried to shake off the sense of dread creeping through me. The sound of the footsteps resumed, retreating this time, disappearing down the corridor until silence filled the air once more. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my mind. It was probably just a nurse on night rounds, I told myself. But deep down something felt off. Those footsteps had felt too heavy, too purposeful. That night I barely slept, afraid of what else I might hear in the darkness. The next morning, daylight filtered through the small window, offering little relief. I met the nurse, a stern woman in her 50s who seemed to move mechanically through her duties. Her name tag read Marie, but she barely acknowledged me as she checked my 4-line and scribbled notes on a clipboard. "About last night," I began hesitantly, "I heard footsteps outside my room." Marie didn't even look up from her chart. "Night shift does rounds," she muttered. "It didn't feel like." "They do rounds," she repeated, her voice sharper this time, as if the topic was closed. I swallowed my concerns, feeling the same unease settle over me. Something about her indifference didn't sit right, but I let it go, not wanting to push. Days passed in a monotonous blur, but the nights were unbearable. Each night the footsteps returned, closer then further away, always stopping just outside my door. The hospital felt deserted after dark, the long corridors stretching out like voids, swallowing any sense of life. Shadows flickered along the walls, elongating into grotesque, distorted shapes. And yet, despite the eerie atmosphere, I never saw anyone during those nighttime hours. Not a single nurse or orderly walked those halls. On the third night, I ventured out of my room. I couldn't take the suffocating stillness any longer. Hobbling with my cast, I gripped the 4-stand for balance as I stepped into the hallway. It was worse out here. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air felt heavy, thick with something intangible. As I took a few tentative steps, the floor beneath me creaked, but it wasn't my footsteps I was hearing. It was something else. A second set of steps echoed behind me, perfectly synchronized with my own. I spun around, expecting to see someone. No one was there. I stood frozen, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The air had turned colder, and I could almost feel someone standing right behind me, close enough to touch. Then I saw it. Just at the edge of my vision, a shadow slipped across the far wall, a dark humanoid shape that melted into the darkness before I could fully comprehend it. Shaking, I rushed back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. The footsteps had followed me all the way back, but now as I pressed my ear to the door, All I heard was silence. I started noticing the others. At first, it was just glimpses. A figure standing at the end of the hall, a fleeting face in a window. They weren't human. Not anymore. One night, I saw a child no older than 10 standing by the nurse's station. He was pale, gaunt, his eyes hollow. I called out to him, but he didn't respond, just stared blankly at the wall before turning and walking away. Later, when I asked Marie about him, she shook her head. "No children on this floor," she said curtly. But I knew what I had seen. The other patients weren't alive. Not anymore. They were remnants, trapped souls, their pain and suffering tied to this cursed place. And as I lay in bed trying to convince myself that I was still sane, they came closer. One night, I woke up to the sensation of something cold, something wet on my chest. I bolted upright and looked down. Blood. Thick, dark blood soaked my gown, pooling beneath me. Panicking, I searched for the source, thinking I had ripped a stitch or reopened an injury. But when I pulled back the covers, the blood was gone. My gown was dry, my sheets pristine. It had been a hallucination or something worse. It wasn't long before I learned the truth behind the hospital. A kindly janitor, one of the only staff members who seemed real, let the details slip one evening. "This place," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was shut down years ago. The things that happened here, they don't talk about it anymore. But it was bad. Real bad." I pressed him for more information, and slowly he revealed the hospital's dark past. During the late 1940s, it had been the site of unsanctioned medical experiments, cruel treatments performed on unwitting patients by a deranged doctor named Dr. Mathis. Patients were mutilated, tortured in the name of medical progress. Many died in agony, their bodies never claimed, their spirits left to wander the halls, seeking vengeance. Dr. Mathis had disappeared shortly after the truth came out, but his presence, it lingered. It became clear that he was the one stalking me at night, his shadowy figure lurking in the corners of my room, watching with malevolent intent. I was not just a patient, I was his next experiment. The final nights were the worst. Sleep became impossible as Dr. Mathis grew more aggressive. Objects in my room moved on their own. My four-stand would slide across the floor, the lights would flicker, plunging me into darkness at the worst possible moments. And the voices, they whispered to me, voices of the lost patients, warning me of what was to come. "Don't let him in," they would hiss. "He'll take you like he took us." But it was too late. He was already inside. One night, I woke to find him standing over me, his face a grotesque mask of decay, his hands stained with the blood of his victims. His eyes gleamed with sadistic pleasure as he reached for me, his cold fingers brushing my skin. I screamed, thrashing against the bed, but no one came to my aid. The hospital was his domain now, a prison for the damned, and I was trapped within its walls. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to escape, or I would become another one of his forgotten patients. I tore the four from my arm, ignoring the pain, and limped into the hallway. But the hospital had changed. The corridors stretched endlessly, looping back on themselves, trapping me in an impossible maze. The walls pulsed with a life of their own, and the shadows moved, chasing me, herding me toward Dr. Mathis. I finally reached the basement, the heart of the hospital's dark past. There, in a room lined with rusted surgical tools, I found the doctor waiting for me. His face twisted into a grotesque grin as he advanced, scalpel in hand. "You'll be my masterpiece," he whispered, his voice echoing through the empty room. I fought back with everything I had, but it was no use. He was too powerful, too deeply tied to this place. And as the scalpel descended, slicing into my flesh, I realized the truth. This was never an accident. I was meant to be here, a final offering to the hospital's dark history. Now I wander the halls like the others. My body is gone, but my spirit remains, trapped within the hospital's cursed walls. Dr. Mathis still stalks the corridors, searching for his next victim, and I am powerless to stop him. We are all prisoners here, lost souls condemned to relive our final moments over and over again. If you ever find yourself in a hospital like mine, don't ignore the shadows. Don't ignore the footsteps. Because once he finds you, you'll never leave.